Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Missing Heir of Winter Hall, Chapter 1, The Letter Bearing No Name. In the autumn of 1894, when the yellow fogs once more crept along the Thames, and the gas lamps of London glowed like distant stars behind curtains of mist, there occurred a singular affair which remains among the most perplexing investigations ever undertaken by my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I have delayed the publication of these events for many years, partly out of respect for several families of standing, and partly because the conclusion touched upon matters of inheritance, whose consequences lingered long after the culprit had been brought to justice. Yet enough time has now passed that I may recount the facts without fear of causing injury to the innocent. It began upon a bleak October morning. Holmes and I were seated in our familiar rooms at Baker Street. A coal fire burned brightly in the grate, though little warmth seemed capable of dispelling the damp chill that hung over London. My companion lounged in his armchair, long fingers pressed together, his sharp grey eyes fixed upon the ceiling. The morning newspapers lay scattered about him in apparent disorder, yet I knew from experience that every page had been carefully examined. I had just concluded a medical journal when Holmes spoke abruptly. "Watson, how long have you owned that watch?" I glanced down in surprise. "My watch? Nearly 7 years, I should think." "Curious." "What is curious?" "That you continue to wind it improperly." I stared at him. "My dear Holmes, I have wound this watch every morning for years." "Precisely. Yet you still apply excessive pressure during the final quarter turn." I laughed. "You cannot possibly know that." "On the contrary, I know it with certainty." "How?" Holmes rose, took the watch from my hand, and held it beneath the lamp. "The stem bears microscopic scoring," said he. "The marks are recent and uniform. Furthermore, your right thumbnail contains a faint indentation caused by resistance from the spring. A more delicate operator would not produce either sign." "Remarkable," I admitted. "Elementary." Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a silver tray. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." She presented a card. Holmes examined it. No name. Indeed, the card was entirely blank. Upon the tray rested also a sealed envelope of thick cream paper. The envelope likewise bore no name. Holmes's eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting. Shall I show him in, sir?" asked Mrs. Hudson. "One moment." Holmes opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet containing only one sentence. "The heir has vanished. Winter Hall is in danger. Come at once." No signature appeared, no address, nothing else. I expected Holmes to dismiss the matter as some eccentric prank. Instead, he sprang to his feet. "Show the gentleman in immediately." Mrs. Hudson departed. "Do you know the sender?" I asked. "Not yet." "Then why the excitement?" Holmes handed me the letter. "Observe the paper." I studied it carefully. "It seems ordinary enough. It is among the most expensive stationery manufactured in England. Hand-cut edges, custom watermark, imported fibres." I held it closer. Sure enough, a faint design was visible. A crown above the initials, W.H. "Winter Hall?" I suggested. "Precisely." "Then the writer comes from that estate?" "Not necessarily." Holmes smiled. "The paper is 5 years old." 5 years? The discoloration along the folds indicates long storage. It was not recently purchased. Before further discussion became possible, footsteps sounded in the hallway. A moment later the visitor entered. He was a tall gentleman of perhaps 50 years, dressed in black travelling clothes. Though plainly exhausted, he possessed an air of dignity that suggested long familiarity with wealth and authority. His face was pale, his hands trembled. Most striking of all was an expression of profound anxiety. He bowed. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes? At your service. My name is Arthur Pembroke." Holmes gestured toward a chair. "Pray be seated." The newcomer sank heavily into it. "I fear I bring a matter of the utmost urgency." "So your anonymous note suggested," the man started. "You received it?" "Naturally." I sent it from Charing Cross this morning. You were wise to omit your name." Pembroke stared. "How could you know that?" Holmes merely smiled. The gentleman glanced between us. "I was warned of your abilities, Mr. Holmes, but I confess I considered many of the stories exaggerated. You no longer do." "No." For several moments he seemed to struggle for composure. Then he spoke. "Winter Hall lies in Northumberland. It has belonged to the Ashcombe family for more than 2 centuries. Holmes nodded. "A distinguished line." "Indeed." Pembroke leaned forward. 3 weeks ago, Lord Ashcombe died. "Natural causes?" "Yes." "And the heir?" The man's face tightened. "That is precisely the problem." A silence followed. "The heir is missing?" I ventured. "Vanished." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "There was only one surviving descendant. His name? Edward Ashcombe. Age? 24. Occupation? None. He was heir to one of the largest estates in the north." Pembroke swallowed. "On the evening before the funeral, Edward disappeared. Without warning, without a trace. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "No trace whatsoever?" I asked. "None." "Letters?" "No." "Financial activity?" "No." "Witnesses?" "None." Holmes remained motionless. "And yet," said he softly, "you do not believe he left voluntarily." Pembroke looked astonished. "How could you know that?" "Because otherwise you would not have come." The man lowered his gaze. "There is more." I expected as much. Pembroke reached inside his coat. From an inner pocket he produced a small object wrapped in cloth. He placed it carefully upon the table. When the cloth was unfolded, a ring appeared. Even at a glance it was magnificent. A heavy gold signet ring bearing the Ashcombe crest. It belonged to Edward. "Where was it found?" asked Holmes. "In the family crypt." I exchanged a glance with my friend. "The crypt?" I repeated. "Yes." "Found by whom?" "The groundskeeper." Holmes leaned forward. "And," Pembroke's voice dropped almost to a whisper, "the ring was discovered beside an empty coffin." For the first time that morning, Holmes appeared genuinely interested. "Empty?" "Yes." "Whose coffin?" Pembroke hesitated. Then he answered, "The coffin of Edward Ashcombe's grandfather." A strange silence filled the room. The ticking of my watch seemed suddenly loud. Outside, somewhere in Baker Street, a carriage rattled through the fog. Holmes rose and crossed slowly to the window. His thin silhouette stood motionless against the grey light. At length he turned. "Mr. Pembroke," said he, "I shall take your case." Relief flooded the man's features. "You will?" "Immediately." "Thank heaven." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "For already there are 3 impossible facts." "3?" "The missing heir." He raised one finger. "The ring in the crypt." A second finger. "The empty coffin." A third. Then a faint smile touched his lips. "And I have learned that whenever 3 impossible facts appear together, at least one of them is a lie." Thus began the singular investigation of Winter Hall, a case which would lead us from the fog-shrouded streets of London to the windswept moors of Northumberland, uncovering secrets buried for generations and exposing a conspiracy far darker than either Holmes or I could initially imagine. At that moment, however, neither of us knew that before the mystery was solved, another man would die, nor that the missing heir himself would become the most dangerous suspect in the entire affair. Chapter 2. The Road to Winter Hall. The following morning found Holmes and myself aboard the northbound express, departing King's Cross, beneath a sky the colour of lead. Our compartment was nearly empty. Save for an elderly clergyman dozing behind a newspaper, we enjoyed the privacy Holmes generally preferred when engaged upon a new investigation. For the first hour he spoke scarcely a word. A large map of Northumberland lay unfolded across his knees. Beside it rested several sheets of notes supplied by Arthur Pembroke before our departure. I occupied myself by studying the documents. "Winter Hall appears impressive enough," said I at length. "It is considerably more than impressive." Holmes never looked up. "Then what is it?" A fortress disguised as a country house. I glanced toward him. That seems an unusual description. Not in the north of England. Holmes tapped the map. The oldest portion of the estate dates to the 17th century. Thick stone walls, limited entrances, extensive grounds. Such places are ideal for privacy. You suspect Edward Ashcombe was concealed there. I suspect nothing. Holmes folded one sheet and placed it aside. I observe. His eyes closed. At present, Watson, the facts are these. He counted them off upon his fingers. A wealthy heir disappears. Yes. His signet ring is found beside an empty coffin. Correct. There is no evidence of travel. No. There has been no ransom demand. None. There has been no discovered body. Fortunately, Holmes opened one eye. That is fortunate only if the young man remains alive. The remark silenced me. I turned once more to the documents. The deceased lord, according to Pembroke's notes, had left behind a substantial fortune, vast tracts of land, and Winter Hall itself. Edward Ashcombe had been his sole heir. There appeared no immediate dispute concerning succession, no disgruntled relatives, no public scandal, no known enemies. The more I read, the stranger the affair seemed. Everything points toward a voluntary disappearance. Holmes gave a faint smile. Does it? Certainly. A young man inherits wealth and responsibility. Perhaps he wished to escape. Then why leave no trace? To avoid pursuit. And why abandon a fortune? I hesitated. That is harder to explain. Quite. The train thundered onward through the countryside. By late afternoon, the landscape had changed dramatically. The gentle fields of the south gave way to rolling moors beneath vast skies. Stone walls divided the land into lonely expanses of brown and gold. A cold wind rattled against the windows. Holmes finally put away his papers. Tell me, Watson. Yes? What is the purpose of a signet ring? A seal. Precisely. He leaned back. A signet ring serves as proof of identity. I suppose so. Then why would a man leave it behind? The question lingered in the compartment long after Holmes returned to silence. Night had fallen by the time we reached the nearest station to Winter Hall. Arthur Pembroke awaited us upon the platform. A horse-drawn carriage stood nearby. The solicitor looked no less troubled than he had in Baker Street. If anything, he looks worse, I whispered. He has not slept, said Holmes. Pembroke overheard. I confess that is true. He looked startled. You know that as well? The eyes. Holmes entered the carriage. The matter weighs heavily upon you. It does. The carriage set off immediately. For nearly an hour we travelled through darkness. Occasionally moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating stretches of open moorland. The road wound steadily upward. At last Pembroke pointed ahead. There. Winter Hall emerged from the night like something from an ancient legend. Even I, who had seen many grand houses throughout England, felt a moment of awe. A vast structure of grey stone crowned a ridge overlooking the surrounding countryside. Tall chimneys rose against the moonlit sky. Countless windows reflected pale light. The older western wing resembled a medieval fortress. The newer sections displayed the elegance of Georgian architecture. It was magnificent, and somehow deeply unsettling. Holmes studied it without expression. A house built in layers. Exactly, said Pembroke. Each generation added something, which often creates useful complications. The solicitor glanced at him. I beg your pardon. Secret passages, hidden staircases, forgotten rooms. Pembroke stared. How did you know? Holmes smiled faintly. Because every ancient estate possesses them. The carriage rolled beneath an iron gate. Moments later, we arrived before the main entrance. The great doors opened before we could knock. A tall woman stood waiting within. She appeared perhaps 40 years of age, dark-haired, elegant, self-possessed. Her eyes, however, revealed strain beneath their composure. Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe, said Pembroke. The late Lord's daughter-in-law. She greeted us politely. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "I appreciate your coming." Holmes bowed. "Your nephew's disappearance concerns us all." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Not grief, not fear, something else. Then it vanished. "We have prepared rooms for you. Thank you." She led us through a vast entrance hall lined with portraits. Generations of Ashcombs stared down from gilded frames. Warriors, politicians, judges, military officers, all bore the same distinctive features. Dark hair, strong brows, sharp noses, a family likeness impossible to miss. Holmes halted before one portrait. "Edward?" Mrs. Ashcombe nodded. The painting depicted a handsome young man of 24, confident, intelligent, perhaps slightly rebellious. There was something lively in his expression, something difficult to imagine extinguished by death. "You knew him well?" asked Holmes. "As well as anyone. Were you close?" "Reasonably. Not warmly, not coldly, merely reasonably." Holmes observed her carefully. "Did he seem troubled before his disappearance?" "No." "Afraid?" "No." "Secretive?" A brief pause. "Not unusually." We continued deeper into the house. Several members of the household were introduced before dinner. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe, the deceased lord's younger brother, a stern military man with a severe moustache. Miss Clara Henshaw, Edward's cousin, a quiet young woman of perhaps 22. Mr. Lionel Graves, estate manager, a lean, watchful fellow whose eyes rarely met one's gaze. Finally, there was Reverend Stephen Mercer, long-time family chaplain. Each appeared affected by Edward's disappearance. Yet Holmes later remarked that they displayed remarkably different forms of concern. Some feared for Edward, others feared something else entirely. At dinner, conversation remained restrained. The empty chair at the far end of the table drew attention repeatedly. Edward's chair, unused for 3 weeks, waiting. After the meal, Holmes requested an immediate examination of the crypt. The family exchanged uneasy glances. Colonel Ashcombe frowned. "Must that be done tonight? Preferably." "It is nearly midnight." "Excellent." The colonel looked displeased. Holmes rose. The dead are often more cooperative after dark. No one appeared reassured by this observation. The family crypt lay beyond the main house, connected to an ancient chapel by a winding stone path. Moonlight illuminated weathered tombstones. Cold wind swept across the hillside. The chapel itself appeared centuries old. Its tower leaned slightly with age. Within, narrow stairs descended beneath the earth. The air grew colder. Damp stone surrounded us. At last we reached the crypt. Rows of coffins rested in alcoves along the walls. Some dated back generations. Others were comparatively recent. Pembroke pointed ahead. There. An open space stood near the far wall. A brass plaque remained fixed above it. Holmes Ashcombe, 1819 to 1888. Yet no coffin occupied the alcove. I felt a chill. "You are certain it was here?" asked Holmes. "Absolutely." "Who discovered it missing?" "The groundskeeper." Holmes crouched beside the empty space. His lantern illuminated the floor. After several moments he smiled. A very small smile, the sort I had learned to regard with interest. "What is it?" I asked. He ignored me. Instead, he turned toward the assembled group. "One question." Everyone looked at him. "When was this crypt last inspected before the discovery?" Silence followed. Then Miss Clara spoke. 3 weeks ago." "On what day?" "The evening Edward vanished." Holmes slowly rose to his feet. The lantern light reflected in his eyes. How very curious. "Why?" asked the colonel. Holmes brushed dust from his sleeve. "Because, Colonel, someone wishes us to believe 2 impossibilities occurred on the same night." "And what are they?" "The disappearance of a living man." His gaze shifted to the empty alcove. "And the disappearance of a dead one." No one spoke. The wind moaned faintly through the chapel above. For the first time since arriving at Winter Hall, I sensed that Holmes had discovered something significant. Yet, as was his habit, he kept the revelation entirely to himself. Chapter 3. The Portrait with the Altered Eyes. I have often observed that Sherlock Holmes appeared most alive when standing upon the threshold of a mystery. Ordinary affairs bored him, routine cases irritated him. Yet place before him a problem whose pieces refused to fit together, and an extraordinary transformation occurred. The languid figure vanished, the eyes brightened, the mind became a finely tuned instrument. Such was his condition the morning following our arrival at Winter Hall. I found him already dressed when I descended for breakfast. Indeed, he had evidently been awake for several hours. A collection of sketches, measurements, and notes covered the table before him. The remains of a cold breakfast sat forgotten at one side. "You have been working." "Naturally." Holmes folded a sheet of paper. The crypt proved more interesting than our hosts realize. "What did you discover?" "Several things." I poured coffee. "And?" "I shall tell you when I am certain of them." I groaned. Holmes smiled. "Patience, Watson, your favourite virtue in others, and least necessary in myself." Before I could formulate a suitable response, Arthur Pembroke entered. "Good morning, gentlemen." "Mr. Pembroke," said Holmes, "you arrive at an opportune moment." "Indeed. I should like to inspect Edward Ashcombe's rooms." The solicitor nodded. "Of course. They have remained untouched." "Exactly as he left them." "Excellent." Within minutes we were ascending a broad staircase toward the eastern wing. The upper corridors of Winter Hall possessed a curious atmosphere. Though richly furnished, they felt strangely deserted. Heavy carpets muffled footsteps. Ancient portraits lined the walls. Sunlight struggled through narrow windows. The entire house seemed burdened by memories. Pembroke unlocked a door. This was Edward's suite. We entered. The room surprised me. I had expected the chambers of a wealthy young aristocrat to display extravagance. Instead, they reflected intelligence and curiosity. Books occupied every available shelf. Maps covered portions of the walls. A telescope stood beside the window. Several scientific journals lay scattered across a writing desk. Holmes surveyed everything with rapid, penetrating glances. "Interesting." "What is?" I asked. "Mr. Ashcombe possessed a mind." The solicitor smiled sadly. "He certainly did. More than that." Holmes lifted a volume from a shelf. "Natural philosophy." Another. "Ancient history." Another. "Architecture." He replaced them. His interests were unusually broad. Edward read constantly. Pembroke's expression softened. He was unlike most young men of his station. Holmes nodded. "That much is apparent." He moved immediately toward the desk. Several drawers were opened and examined. Letters were sorted. Receipts studied. Documents arranged in neat piles. For nearly half an hour, Holmes worked without interruption. I watched patiently. Eventually he sat back. "Curious?" "What now?" I asked. "The absence." "Absence of what?" "A diary." Pembroke looked surprised. "Edward kept journals." "Precisely. You know that." "The ink stains upon his fingers visible in the portrait downstairs." Holmes rose. "A man who writes frequently develops characteristic markings." Pembroke shook his head in amazement. "You truly miss nothing." "I miss a great deal." Holmes examined the bookshelf once more. "I simply attempt to notice what remains." His gaze suddenly settled upon a large portrait hanging above the fireplace. The painting depicted Edward Ashcombe seated beside a hunting dog. The work appeared recent, perhaps no more than 2 years old. Holmes approached it, then stopped. Without warning, he climbed onto a chair. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Looking." "You could do that from the floor." "Not properly." His face moved close to the canvas. Several seconds passed. Then his expression changed. The change was slight, yet I recognized it immediately. Holmes had found something. "Watson." "Yes?" "Would you kindly close the door?" I obeyed. Pembroke looked puzzled. "Is something wrong?" "Possibly." Holmes produced a magnifying lens. Carefully he examined the portrait's face, particularly the eyes. At length he climbed down. "Mr. Pembroke." "Yes?" "When was this portrait painted?" "Approximately 2 years ago." "And has it been altered since?" The solicitor frowned. "Altered? Restored, perhaps?" "Not to my knowledge." Holmes pointed upward. "The eyes have been repainted." A silence followed. I looked again at the portrait. The alteration was invisible to me. Pembroke appeared equally baffled. "Are you certain?" "Quite." Holmes climbed onto the chair once more. "Observe the difference in texture." We joined him. Now that he indicated the area, I could indeed detect a faint irregularity. The paint surrounding the eyes seemed newer, more vibrant, almost imperceptibly so. "Extraordinary," murmured Pembroke. "But why alter a portrait?" "An excellent question." Holmes carefully lifted the frame from its hook. Something immediately fell to the floor, a folded piece of paper. We all stared. Holmes picked it up. The paper had yellowed with age. Its edges were worn. Clearly it had rested behind the portrait for some time. "Well?" I asked. Holmes unfolded it. His expression hardened. "What does it say?" Without answering, he handed me the note. The message consisted of only 6 words. "The eyes see what the wall hides, nothing more." No signature, no date. I read it twice, then a third time. "It makes no sense." "Not yet." Holmes returned his attention to the portrait, specifically to Edward's painted eyes. Suddenly he laughed, a short, delighted laugh. "My dear Watson, our missing heir appears to have possessed a sense of humour." "What do you mean?" "The clue is perfectly obvious." "It is?" To him. Before I could protest, Holmes began examining the wall itself. Every inch received careful scrutiny. He tapped panels, measured distances, inspected mouldings. At last his knuckles produced a different sound, a hollow sound. Holmes froze. There. The wall section appeared identical to the surrounding woodwork, yet after several minutes of searching, he discovered a concealed catch. A narrow panel swung inward. Behind it lay a hidden compartment. Inside rested a small leather notebook. Nothing else. Pembroke inhaled sharply. Edward's journal. Holmes removed it carefully. The cover bore no title, no markings, merely the initials E.A. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Holmes opened the first page. His eyes moved rapidly across the writing. The second page, the third. Suddenly he stopped. A peculiar expression crossed his face. "What is it?" I asked. He closed the journal. "There are pages missing." "Missing?" "Removed deliberately." "Important pages?" "I suspect very important." Pembroke looked alarmed. "What remains?" Holmes reopened the notebook. Most entries appeared ordinary. Descriptions of estate business, personal observations, travel notes. Nothing remarkable. Then we reached the final intact entry. It had been written only days before Edward vanished. Holmes read it aloud. "There are lies beneath this house, older than any of them realize. If my suspicions are correct, Winter Hall was built to conceal more than stone. I must proceed carefully. Someone has begun watching me." The room fell silent. "Watching me?" repeated Pembroke softly. Holmes continued. "I can trust no one entirely. Not even—" The sentence ended abruptly. The remainder of the page had been torn away. Several additional pages were likewise missing. The journal then resumed near the end. Only one final sentence remained, a sentence written in hurried script. Holmes read it slowly. "If anything happens to me, the answer lies with the man who never existed." The words seemed to hang in the air. "The man who never existed," I said. "What can that possibly mean?" "No idea." Yet Holmes spoke without conviction. His gaze had become distant, focused inward. The look he wore when assembling fragments of a larger pattern. Pembroke swallowed. Do you believe Edward discovered something? Undoubtedly. What? Holmes closed the journal. That is precisely what someone wished to prevent us learning. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. The sudden interruption startled all three of us. A servant entered. His face was pale. His hands shook visibly. "Beg pardon, sir." "What is it?" asked Pembroke. The servant hesitated, then spoke. "Mr. Graves has been found." The estate manager, "Yes, sir." "Found where?" The servant looked from one face to another. Finally he answered, "At the old bell tower." A terrible pause followed. "Is he injured?" asked Pembroke. The servant swallowed. "No, sir." "Then what is wrong?" The young man seemed unable to continue. Holmes stepped forward. "Dead." The servant nodded. "Yes, sir." The room became utterly still. Only moments earlier, we had uncovered evidence suggesting Edward Ashcombe had been investigating a secret. Now, one of the household's most important figures had died. Holmes slowly slipped the journal into his coat pocket. Then he turned toward the door. "Come, Watson. You suspect murder?" Holmes' face had grown grim. "I suspect," said he, "that someone has realized we are asking the correct questions." And with that, we hurried from the room toward the ancient bell tower, where the second tragedy of the Winter Hall mystery awaited us. Chapter 4. Death Beneath the Bell Tower. The old bell tower stood upon the northern edge of the estate, where the grounds of Winter Hall merged gradually into the wild moorland beyond. As Holmes and I hurried across the windswept grounds, the morning sky had darkened with gathering clouds. The ancient structure rose before us, like a solitary sentinel from another age. Several servants had already gathered nearby. Their anxious whispers ceased as we approached. Arthur Pembroke arrived only moments behind us. "Where is he?" Holmes asked. A groundskeeper pointed toward the tower entrance. "Inside, sir." The man's face had gone white. "I found him." Holmes entered immediately. The interior smelled of damp stone and dust. A narrow spiral staircase wound upward through darkness. At the base of those stairs lay the body of Lionel Graves. The estate manager had fallen awkwardly against the wall. His neck bent at an unnatural angle. One arm remained outstretched as though he had attempted to break his fall. I knelt beside him. After a brief examination, I rose. "He has been dead approximately 2 hours. Cause? A broken neck. Accident?" I hesitated. "Possibly." Holmes crouched beside the corpse. His eyes narrowed. "Possibly." That single word told me much. When Holmes repeated one's conclusion rather than accepting it, disagreement generally followed. He examined the dead man's clothing, the pockets, the hands, the boots, everything. At length he stood. "Watson, would you kindly accompany me upstairs?" The request puzzled me. Nevertheless, I followed him. The staircase twisted upward for nearly 60 feet before opening into the bell chamber itself. Ancient wooden beams crossed the ceiling. The great bronze bell hung overhead. Open arches provided views of the surrounding countryside. The wind howled through them. Holmes walked directly to one of the openings. He looked down. Far below, the body remained visible. "Interesting." "What is?" Holmes pointed. "The position." I studied it. "What about it?" "If Graves fell from here, he should have landed 6 feet farther west." I blinked. "What?" "The wind." Holmes indicated the open arch. "It blows steadily from the east." "Even so. Furthermore, his body displays none of the secondary injuries consistent with a fall from this height." I stared. "You mean he did not fall?" "I mean he was already dead, or nearly so, before reaching the bottom." A chill passed through me. "Murder? Perhaps." Holmes moved across the chamber. Something on the floor had attracted his attention. A faint scuff mark, then another. The marks led toward a wooden hatch set into the wall. Holmes examined it. The hatch opened onto a narrow maintenance ledge, circling the exterior of the tower. Dust covered most of the surface, yet one section had been disturbed recently. Someone had stood there. More than one person, perhaps. Holmes measured several footprints, then suddenly froze. What is it? Without answering, he removed a tape measure from his pocket. Several calculations followed. Finally he smiled, a very dangerous smile. Ah, you have found something. Indeed. What? The first genuine lie. I sighed. Would you care to explain? No. Naturally. We descended once more. The gathered household watched anxiously. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe stood near the entrance. His expression appeared grim but controlled. Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe looked pale. Miss Clara Henshaw seemed genuinely distressed. The Reverend Mercer quietly offered prayers. Holmes observed each face carefully. Then his attention settled upon the Colonel. Colonel Ashcombe, yes? You were acquainted with Mr. Graves for many years. Nearly 20. A trustworthy man. I believed so. Believed? The Colonel frowned. One never truly knows another person. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. No, one does not. The exchange seemed insignificant at the time. Only later did I understand its importance. After the body had been removed, Holmes requested access to Graves's office. The room occupied a corner of the estate's administrative wing. Ledgers filled the shelves. Maps covered the walls. A large oak desk stood near the window. Everything appeared orderly. Too orderly. Holmes noticed it at once. Someone has searched this room. Pembroke looked startled. How can you tell? The desk, he pointed. Observe the dust. I saw nothing unusual. Holmes sighed. Watson, you would fail to notice an elephant in a broom closet. Thank you. The dust pattern has been disturbed recently. He opened several drawers. They were emptied and reorganized, perhaps by Graves himself. Not likely. Holmes pulled open the lowest drawer. Inside lay a collection of financial records. He examined them rapidly. Most appeared routine. Estate expenses, maintenance accounts, tenant agreements. Then one ledger caught his attention. It was considerably older than the others. Its leather cover had faded with age. The dates upon its spine read 1861 to 1867. Holmes opened it. The pages contained payroll records, construction expenses, material purchases. Nothing remarkable. Then he stopped. For nearly a minute he studied one particular page. Curious. What now? I asked. Look here. He handed me the ledger. A list of labourers occupied the page. Most names appeared ordinary. Thomas Reed, John Wilkes, Samuel Porter. Then one entry stood alone. No first name, no address. Merely Mr. Blackwood. Beside it appeared unusually large payments, far larger than those received by any other worker. Who was Blackwood? I asked. No idea. Holmes took back the ledger. But whoever he was, someone paid him extraordinarily well. For what? Holmes closed the book. That, Watson, is becoming the central question. At that moment, something slipped from between the pages. A folded scrap of paper. Holmes picked it up. Unlike the ledger, the paper appeared recent, perhaps only weeks old. He unfolded it. Inside was a rough sketch. A map, or part of one. The drawing depicted only a section of Winter Hall. Several corridors, a staircase, and a symbol marked in red ink. A circle. Nothing more. No writing? I asked. None. Meaningless? Hardly. Holmes held the paper toward the light. Notice the folds. I looked carefully. The map had originally been part of a larger sheet. Several edges had been torn away. The remainder is missing. Exactly. Pembroke stepped closer. Do you know what area of the house it represents? Holmes studied it, then looked up. Yes. Where? The oldest section. The solicitor frowned. The western wing? Precisely. Hardly anyone goes there. Why not? It contains unused rooms. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Unused rooms are among my favourite things. That evening a storm arrived. Rain battered the windows. Wind roared through the chimneys. The atmosphere within Winter Hall grew increasingly strained. News of Graves' death spread rapidly among the servants. Whispers filled every corridor. Fear settled over the estate like a living thing. After dinner, Holmes and I retired briefly to our rooms. I found him seated beside the fire. The mysterious journal lay open before him. He reread the final entries several times. Finally he spoke. "Watson." "Yes? Suppose a man discovers a secret. A dangerous secret. Very. He might be silenced." "Naturally." Holmes closed the journal. "Now suppose that secret concerns events 30 years old." I considered. The individuals involved may no longer be alive. Exactly. Then why murder? Holmes stared into the flames. Because the consequences remain alive. The remark puzzled me. Before I could question him further, a sudden knock sounded at the door. A servant entered. His face displayed obvious alarm. "Mr. Holmes." "Yes?" "Miss Henshaw requests your immediate assistance." "Why?" "She says she has found something." "What?" The servant swallowed nervously. "A letter." Holmes rose. "A letter from whom?" "She does not know, sir." The young man hesitated, then added, "It was slipped beneath her bedroom door less than 10 minutes ago." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "Interesting. Why?" "Because everyone in this house knows a murderer may be among them." We followed the servant at once. Miss Clara Henshaw awaited us in a small sitting room. She clutched an envelope with trembling hands. I did not open it. Wise. Holmes accepted the letter. The envelope bore no name, no seal, no markings whatsoever. Very carefully he unfolded the paper within. I watched his expression change. Not shock, not surprise, recognition. "Well?" I asked. Without speaking, Holmes handed me the note. Only a single sentence had been written. A sentence that immediately caused my blood to run cold. "If you wish to find the heir, search for the man who never existed." Below the message appeared a crude drawing, a bell tower, and beneath it, a coffin. Holmes folded the letter slowly. Then he turned toward the darkened window, where rain lashed against the glass. For several moments he said nothing. At last he spoke, and his voice contained a certainty I had not heard before. "The game has changed." "How?" Holmes's eyes remained fixed upon the storm. "Until now, someone has been hiding. And now," he slipped the letter into his pocket, "now they are speaking to us." Outside, thunder rolled across the moors. Inside Winter Hall, the shadows seemed deeper than ever. And somewhere within that vast ancient house, a person who knew the truth had just made contact. Chapter 5. The Forgotten Wing. The storm continued throughout the night. Rain lashed against the ancient windows of Winter Hall, while the wind prowled endlessly through chimneys and corridors, producing strange sounds that might easily have unsettled a less rational mind than my own. Even so, I confess I slept poorly. The discoveries of the previous day lingered in my thoughts. A missing heir, a dead estate manager, an anonymous warning, and, perhaps most perplexing of all, the recurring reference to the man who never existed. By breakfast, the entire household appeared strained. Servants spoke in whispers. Doors opened cautiously. Every unexpected sound drew nervous glances. Fear had become an unseen guest at Winter Hall. Holmes alone appeared unaffected. Indeed, he seemed almost invigorated. His appetite was excellent. His mood unexpectedly cheerful. Experience had taught me that such behavior usually indicated progress. When Holmes approached the solution of a mystery, his spirits invariably improved. "Good morning, Watson. You appear pleased." "I am, because we are finally asking the correct questions." He buttered a piece of toast. "Unfortunately, everyone else continues asking the wrong ones." Before I could pursue the matter, Arthur Pembroke entered the dining room. "Mr. Holmes, good morning. I understand you wish to examine the western wing." "Immediately." Pembroke hesitated. "There may be some difficulty." Holmes looked up. What sort of difficulty? The wing has remained largely unused for decades. Excellent. Many rooms are locked. Even better. The structure is unstable in places. Holmes smiled. Now you are actively encouraging me. Within half an hour, we had gathered lanterns and begun our exploration. The western wing stood apart from the newer sections of Winter Hall. Its architecture belonged to another era entirely. Narrow passageways replaced broad corridors. Low ceilings created an oppressive atmosphere. The stone walls appeared centuries old. Dust coated nearly every surface. As we advanced deeper into the structure, signs of habitation gradually vanished. No servants came here. No family members visited. The place felt forgotten, and perhaps deliberately so. Holmes carried the fragment of map discovered in Graves' office. At every intersection he paused to compare it against our surroundings. Eventually we arrived before a narrow staircase descending into darkness. There, Pembroke frowned. I had forgotten this existed. That is precisely why it interests me. We descended. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom lay a corridor, unlike any other in the house. Its walls consisted of rough stone rather than finished plaster. The passage seemed older than Winter Hall itself. Almost medieval. Extraordinary, I murmured. Holmes nodded. Very. The corridor ended at a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. Dust covered the handle. Cobwebs stretched across the frame. No one appeared to have entered for many years. Holmes examined the lock. It has not been opened recently. Then whatever lies beyond cannot concern our present case. He glanced at me. My dear Watson, the most dangerous assumption in any investigation is deciding what cannot be relevant. A skeleton key emerged from his pocket. Several moments later, the lock clicked. The door creaked open. A stale odour drifted outward. The lantern light revealed a surprisingly large chamber. Furniture stood beneath white sheets. Bookshelves lined the walls. A writing desk occupied one corner. Everything appeared frozen in time, as though its occupant had departed suddenly and never returned. Holmes entered first. His eyes moved rapidly from object to object. Interesting. The room possessed a curious character. Unlike the rest of Winter Hall, it felt personal, lived in. The books differed from those found elsewhere in the house. Scientific texts, engineering manuals, works of philosophy. A microscope rested upon a table. Nearby stood several pieces of experimental apparatus. Someone intelligent lived here, I observed. Undoubtedly. Pembroke looked bewildered. I have never seen this room before, yet it belonged to someone important. Holmes approached the desk. A thick layer of dust covered its surface. Most drawers were empty. One, however, remained locked. It took Holmes less than a minute to open it. Inside rested a collection of documents, letters, certificates, photographs. The first photograph immediately captured our attention. It depicted several members of the Ashcombe family gathered upon the lawn before Winter Hall. The image appeared approximately 30 years old. Lord Ashcombe stood at the centre. Beside him stood a woman I assumed to be his wife. Several children completed the group. Holmes studied the photograph silently, then handed it to Pembroke. How many children did Lord Ashcombe have? 2. Holmes said nothing. Are you certain? Quite. The daughter-in-law and Colonel Gregory's brother? Exactly. Holmes pointed toward the image. Then kindly explain the third child. Pembroke stared. The colour drained from his face. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake. A boy of perhaps 10 years stood near the edge of the photograph. His resemblance to the Ashcombe family was unmistakable. Dark hair, strong features. The family likeness appeared obvious. Yet Pembroke looked genuinely astonished. I have never seen him before. Nor, I suspect, has anyone wished you to. Holmes examined the remaining documents. The pattern became increasingly strange. More photographs, more references, a school report, medical records, birthday cards. Every item concerned the same child. a child whose existence seemed entirely absent from modern family history. At length Holmes discovered a leather folder. Inside rested a birth certificate. He read it carefully, then handed it to me. The document bore the name Nathaniel Ashcombe, date of birth March 3rd, 1868. Parents Lord Henry Ashcombe and Margaret Ashcombe. I looked up. This proves it. Indeed, a third child existed. Yes, Holmes's expression had become unusually serious, which means someone has erased him. The realization settled heavily upon the room. A human life had been removed from memory. Not forgotten, removed. Deliberately, systematically, completely. Why? I asked. No idea. Yet Holmes's voice suggested the answer lay closer than before. He continued searching. At last he found a newspaper clipping folded inside a book. The article had yellowed considerably with age. Its date read June 1886. Holmes began reading. Suddenly he stopped. What is it? Without answering, he handed me the clipping. The article described a tragic accident. A young member of the Ashcombe family had reportedly drowned while boating on a nearby lake. The victim's name, Nathaniel Ashcombe, age 18. I finished reading. A drowning, perhaps. Do you doubt it? Holmes tapped the paper. Several details concern me, such as, the body was never recovered. I blinked. He was presumed drowned. Exactly. Holmes folded the clipping. Presumed. Before further discussion became possible, a sound echoed through the chamber. A faint noise, almost imperceptible, yet Holmes reacted instantly. Someone was outside. The sound had come from the corridor. Holmes crossed the room in 3 strides. He reached the doorway just in time to glimpse a shadow disappearing around the far corner. Stop! His command echoed through the stone passage. No answer came. The footsteps accelerated. Holmes ran. I followed immediately. The corridor twisted unexpectedly. By the time we reached the corner, our unseen observer had vanished. No doors, no visible exits, nothing. Only empty stone passage, stretching into darkness. Holmes stood motionless, listening. Then slowly he smiled, a smile that never boded well for someone. Did you see who it was? I asked. No. Then why are you smiling? Because our discovery frightened someone. He pointed toward the floor. A small object lay near the wall, dropped during the flight. Holmes picked it up. It was a silver pocket watch. Old, expensive, engraved. The initials upon the cover read, G.A. Gregory Ashcombe, said Pembroke quietly. The Colonel. Holmes slipped the watch into his pocket. Perhaps. You believe he was spying on us? I believe someone wishes us to believe that. The distinction intrigued me. Then the watch was planted? Possibly. Holmes looked back toward the hidden room. Either way, our unknown observer has provided useful information. How so? He now knows that we have learned about Nathaniel Ashcombe. The significance of this seemed immediately obvious. If Nathaniel's existence had truly been erased, then the revelation threatened someone. Someone who had been watching us. Someone close enough to Winter Hall to move unseen through secret passages. Someone desperate enough to kill. As we prepared to leave the chamber, Holmes paused beside the desk one final time. Something inside a drawer had attracted his attention. A single folded sheet. Unlike the other papers, it appeared relatively new, perhaps only a few years old. The handwriting was hurried, the ink slightly faded. Holmes unfolded it. His eyes narrowed. Then he read aloud. If they discover that Nathaniel lived, they will eventually discover why he vanished. A pause followed. The next line was even more troubling. And if they discover that, the heir will never be safe. The document bore no signature, no date, nothing. Yet the implications were unmistakable. 30 years ago, a young Ashcombe had supposedly drowned. Now a modern Ashcombe had disappeared, and somehow the two events were connected. Holmes folded the paper carefully. Then he looked toward the dark corridor beyond. "The dead," said he quietly, "have begun speaking." I felt an involuntary chill. "Do you know what happened to Nathaniel?" "Not yet." "Do you believe he truly drowned?" Holmes extinguished one lantern before answering. "No, Watson." His voice echoed softly through the forgotten chamber. "I believe Nathaniel Ashcombe became the first missing heir of Winter Hall." And with that unsettling observation, we left the hidden room behind us, unaware that before another day had passed, an attempt would be made upon Holmes's own life. Chapter 6. The Midnight Saboteur. The discoveries made within the forgotten chamber cast a long shadow over the remainder of that day. For the first time since our arrival at Winter Hall, the mystery possessed a discernible shape. Not a solution, certainly, yet a pattern. The disappearance of Edward Ashcombe no longer appeared an isolated event. It had roots, deep roots, roots extending backward through decades of concealed history. Nathaniel Ashcombe, the forgotten son, the vanished heir, the young man whose existence had been erased so completely that even Arthur Pembroke, solicitor to the family for nearly 20 years, had never heard his name. As evening descended, I found Holmes unusually thoughtful. He spent several hours studying the documents recovered from the hidden room. Photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, each received the same intense scrutiny. Occasionally he made notes. More often he simply sat motionless, his fingers pressed together, his eyes half closed. That familiar pose invariably indicated vigorous mental activity. At dinner, conversation remained strained. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe appeared increasingly irritable. Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe seemed distracted. Miss Clara Henshaw spoke scarcely at all. Only Reverend Mercer attempted to preserve a sense of normality. His efforts met with limited success. Fear had become impossible to ignore. One death had already occurred. A second seemed entirely possible. After the meal, Holmes excused himself early. "I require solitude." "To think?" I asked. "To listen." The reply puzzled me. "Listen to what?" Holmes smiled faintly. "To Winter Hall." With that enigmatic remark, he departed. Shortly after midnight, I was awakened by a sound. At first, I believed it part of a dream, a distant crash, then another, this time unmistakably real. I sat upright. The noise had come from somewhere within the house. Moments later, hurried footsteps sounded in the corridor. A knock rattled my door. "Watson." It was Holmes. I opened immediately. His expression was alert, focused, excited. "Come quickly. What has happened?" "I should very much like to know." We hurried through the dimly lit corridors. Several servants had emerged from their rooms. Voices echoed throughout the house. The disturbance appeared centered in the library. When we arrived, a remarkable sight greeted us. One entire section of bookshelves had collapsed. Thousands of volumes lay scattered across the floor. Broken wood protruded in every direction. Dust filled the air. Arthur Pembroke stood nearby in obvious alarm. "What happened?" "No one knows," he replied. "The crash woke half the house." Holmes ignored the wreckage. Instead, he examined the area immediately behind it. Then he smiled, a dangerous smile. "Ah, what is it?" I asked. "This was no accident." He pointed toward the shattered supports. Several metal brackets had been partially cut through. The damage appeared recent, deliberate, invisible from the front. "Sabotage," I said. "Precisely. Then someone intended the shelves to collapse." "Yes." Holmes crouched. His fingers traced a mark upon the floor, a long scrape, fresh, recent. "What are you seeing?" asked Pembroke. "The wrong target." "The wrong target?" Holmes rose. The shelves were meant to fall upon someone. A silence followed. "Who?" Holmes looked directly at me. "Myself." The realization struck me instantly. Earlier that evening, Holmes had spent nearly 2 hours working in the library, studying records, examining estate documents. Had the shelves collapsed then, the consequences would have been severe, possibly fatal. Pembroke's face paled. My God. Quite. Holmes examined the rear wall. A narrow opening became visible behind the fallen structure. Not a doorway, a concealed passage. My pulse quickened. Another secret corridor. Indeed, the opening was just large enough for a person to pass through. Dust coated much of the interior. Yet fresh footprints remained clearly visible. Someone had used the passage recently. Very recently. Holmes lit a lantern. Come. Without hesitation, he entered. The hidden corridor wound through the walls of Winter Hall like the burrow of some enormous creature. Narrow. Twisting. Claustrophobic. In many places we were forced to proceed single file. The air smelled of stone and age. Occasionally, we passed concealed observation points, tiny openings providing views into rooms throughout the house. Bedrooms, hallways, drawing rooms, even portions of the chapel. Whoever designed these passages had valued secrecy above all else. Extraordinary, I murmured. Disturbing, said Holmes. Why? He gestured toward one observation slit. Consider the implications. I did. Anyone familiar with these corridors could observe nearly every resident of Winter Hall. Move unseen, listen unnoticed, disappear at will. Suddenly the events of recent weeks seemed considerably less mysterious. A person using such passages could easily evade detection, could monitor conversations, could plant evidence, could commit murder. We continued deeper. The footprints remained visible. Eventually they led us to a small chamber hidden between two walls. The room contained little furniture, merely a chair, a lantern, several shelves. Yet someone had occupied it recently. Food wrappers lay upon the floor. A blanket rested in one corner. Most striking of all was a collection of papers spread across a table. Holmes examined them immediately. His eyes narrowed. What is it? He handed me one sheet. It contained sketches, detailed sketches, of Winter Hall's residents, Colonel Gregory, Mrs. Ashcombe, Clara Henshaw, Reverend Mercer, Arthur Pembroke, even Holmes and myself. Each drawing included observations written in careful handwriting, habits, schedules, movements, conversations. Someone had been conducting surveillance, extensive surveillance, for months, possibly years. This is madness. No, Holmes remained calm. It is preparation. For what? He did not answer. Instead, he lifted another document, a map, far more complete than the fragment discovered in Graves' office. The entire network of secret passages appeared charted in remarkable detail. Every hidden entrance, every concealed room, every observation point. Whoever possessed this map controlled the unseen heart of Winter Hall. Then Holmes found something else, a notebook. Its cover bore no name. Inside were dozens of entries, dates, observations, plans. One particular passage captured Holmes's attention. He read it silently. Then his expression hardened. What is it? Without speaking, he handed me the notebook. The entry had been written only 2 weeks earlier. It read, "The detective has arrived sooner than expected. If he learns the truth before the heir is secured, everything may be lost." I stared. The detective? Clearly myself. Then whoever wrote this knew you were coming. Apparently. Holmes took back the notebook. His face had become unusually grave, which means our adversary is considerably more informed than I anticipated. A faint sound interrupted us. Footsteps. Distant. Moving through the corridor. Holmes extinguished the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. The footsteps drew nearer, slow, careful, cautious. Someone approached. We remained silent. The footsteps stopped just outside. A pause followed. Then came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Someone stood on the opposite side of the doorway, listening, waiting. My hand drifted instinctively toward my revolver. Holmes remained perfectly still. Several seconds passed. Then, the figure moved. Rapid footsteps retreated down the corridor. Holmes relit the lantern. "After him!" We ran. The chase that followed remains among the strangest I have ever experienced. The hidden passages twisted endlessly. At every turn our quarry seemed one step ahead. We caught only brief glimpses, a dark coat, a shadow, the flash of a lantern, nothing more. The pursuit continued for several minutes, then abruptly ended. The corridor opened into a narrow staircase. Above us stood a concealed door, still swinging. Our fugitive had escaped. Holmes emerged into a familiar room. I recognized it immediately. Edward Ashcombe's bedroom. The hidden staircase terminated behind the very portrait in which we had discovered the secret journal. For several moments none of us spoke. Then Holmes laughed softly, not with amusement, with admiration. "Our opponent is clever. Did you recognize him?" "No." "Then we have gained nothing." Holmes turned toward me. "On the contrary." His eyes shone with renewed intensity. "We have gained a great deal." "Such as?" "Proof." "Proof of what?" He crossed to the window. Outside, moonlight illuminated the vast grounds of Winter Hall. The missing heir. A pause. The forgotten heir. Another pause. Then, the murdered estate manager. Holmes folded his arms. "They are all connected. I already suspected that." "Yes, but now I know something more." "What?" His gaze remained fixed upon the darkness outside. "The person hiding in these passages is not protecting the secret." For the first time, uncertainty entered my mind. "Then what are they doing?" Holmes answered without turning. "They are protecting Edward Ashcombe." The statement stunned me. "Protecting him?" "Yes." "From whom?" Slowly Holmes faced me. His expression had grown very serious. "That, Watson, is the question that will solve this entire case." At that precise moment, a gunshot shattered the silence. Glass exploded inward. A bullet struck the wall scarcely inches from Holmes's head. Someone outside had fired through the window. Instinctively we threw ourselves to the floor. A second shot followed. Then silence. Absolute silence. The assassin had vanished into the night. For several moments neither Holmes nor I moved. Then Holmes rose calmly to his feet. He examined the shattered glass, the bullet hole, the trajectory. Finally he smiled, a cold smile, the sort that always preceded a decisive move. "Excellent," I stared. "Excellent?" "Indeed. You have just been shot at." "Precisely." Holmes retrieved the flattened bullet from the wall. His eyes gleamed. "For the first time since arriving at Winter Hall, our enemy has made a mistake." Outside, beyond the moonlit grounds, the unseen marksman had disappeared. But Holmes was already studying the clue left behind, and I knew from long experience that whoever had fired those shots had just taken a very dangerous risk. For Sherlock Holmes never forgot a mistake. Chapter 7. The Bullet from the Moor. The shattered glass remained scattered across the floor of Edward Ashcombe's room long after the gunshots had ceased. Neither Holmes nor I spoke for several moments. The sudden attack had altered the nature of our investigation. Until now, we had been dealing with concealment, secrets, misdirection, perhaps murder. But the bullet that had narrowly missed Holmes transformed suspicion into certainty. Someone at Winter Hall feared discovery enough to kill. Holmes, however, appeared less concerned by the attempt upon his life than by the bullet itself. He examined it beneath the lamp, turned it slowly between his fingers, measured it against a small gauge from his pocket. Finally he nodded. "Interesting, is it?" "Very." I stared at him. "My dear Holmes, a man has just attempted to murder you." "Quite so. And your response is interesting." "It is preferable to being dead." He slipped the bullet into his waistcoat pocket. "Besides, Watson, our marksman has provided valuable information." "What information?" He missed. "Fortunately." "No." Holmes shook his head. "Significantly." The distinction escaped me. Seeing my confusion, he continued. "The shot originated from approximately 200 yards. That seems likely." "The weather was clear." "Yes." "The window was illuminated." "Agreed." and I was standing perfectly still. I frowned. So? A competent marksman would not have missed. The implication dawned upon me. You believe he intended to miss? Possibly. Then why fire at all? Holmes smiled faintly. An excellent question. Before sunrise the following morning, Holmes insisted upon visiting the location from which the shot had been fired. We crossed the dew-covered grounds while much of Winter Hall still slept. The eastern horizon glowed faintly. Mist drifted across the moors. Holmes led the way with remarkable certainty. How do you know where to look? The trajectory. That precisely. Within 20 yards. He proved correct. After nearly half an hour of searching, we discovered a shallow depression among the heather. The position offered a clear view of Edward's bedroom window, a marksman's ideal location. Holmes immediately began examining the ground. Several clues emerged: compressed vegetation, boot impressions, a discarded matchstick. Then Holmes found something unexpected: a brass cartridge casing. He held it up. The morning light glinted from its surface. Remarkable. What is remarkable? This was not fired from a rifle. I blinked. Impossible. Hardly. He handed me the casing. The caliber appeared smaller than expected. Then what weapon produced it? A sporting carbine. Are those common? Among wealthy gentlemen? Holmes looked toward Winter Hall, particularly wealthy gentlemen with access to private estates. His gaze lingered upon the distant house, thoughtful, calculating, as though rearranging pieces upon an invisible chessboard. Then he noticed something else: a scrap of cloth caught upon a thorn bush. Dark blue, expensive fabric, torn recently. Holmes examined it closely. Interesting. What now? Our shooter was wearing a tailored coat. Many people possess tailored coats. Certainly. He folded the cloth carefully. But not everyone tears them climbing fences in the dark. Upon returning to Winter Hall, Holmes requested an unusual meeting. Every resident of the house was invited. The gathering took place in the library. The damaged bookshelves had already been partially repaired. Yet the atmosphere remained tense. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe appeared irritated. Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe seemed apprehensive. Clara Henshaw looked exhausted. Reverend Mercer maintained his customary calm. Arthur Pembroke observed everyone nervously. Holmes stood before the fireplace. "Thank you for coming." No one replied. "I shall not waste your time." He removed the cartridge casing. "Last night someone fired upon me." A murmur spread through the room. The colonel frowned. "Surely that proves an outsider is involved." "Does it?" Holmes's tone remained mild. The colonel stiffened. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing." Holmes smiled. "Yet." Several faces tightened. Holmes continued. "Our marksman occupied a position on the moor approximately 200 yards from the house." "Can you identify him?" asked Clara. "Not yet." A pause. "However, I can identify something else." He produced the scrap of blue cloth. This was torn from the shooter's coat. The room grew still. Several people glanced involuntarily at one another. Holmes noticed. "Naturally, I would appreciate a brief inspection of everyone's outer garments." Colonel Gregory frowned immediately. "This is absurd." "Perhaps. But useful." The colonel's irritation deepened. "Do you suspect one of us?" Holmes met his gaze. "I suspect everyone." No further objections followed. One by one the coats were examined. Most revealed nothing. Then Holmes reached Colonel Gregory's riding coat. A small tear appeared near the lower hem. The missing fragment seemed roughly similar in size to the cloth recovered from the moor. The room fell silent. The colonel's face darkened. "This proves nothing." "Correct." Holmes remained calm. "It proves very little." The colonel relaxed slightly. Then Holmes delivered the next blow, particularly since someone attempted to repair the tear recently. The silence became absolute. "Repair?" repeated Pembroke. Holmes pointed. Fresh stitching remained visible upon close inspection. Crude, hasty, recent. The Colonel's jaw tightened. I damaged it while riding. When? Several days ago. Holmes nodded. Perhaps. The Colonel glared. You do not believe me. I rarely believe anyone entirely. The exchange ended there. Yet I noticed something important. For the first time, Gregory Ashcombe appeared genuinely frightened. That afternoon, Holmes devoted himself to the records discovered in the forgotten chamber, specifically those concerning Nathaniel Ashcombe, the forgotten heir, the young man supposedly drowned 30 years earlier. I found him surrounded by documents. Photographs covered the desk. Letters lay arranged in careful order. A timeline occupied several pages of notes. Making progress? Considerable. He tapped one photograph. Look. The image depicted Nathaniel at approximately 18 years of age. Handsome, intelligent, confident. There was something strangely familiar about him, something I had failed to notice before. Then suddenly it struck me. My word. Precisely. Nathaniel resembles Edward. Strongly. Indeed, the similarity was remarkable. Not identical, yet unmistakable. The same eyes, the same jawline, the same expression, almost as though history had repeated itself. Family resemblance. More than that, Holmes selected another photograph, then another. Comparisons followed. Measurements, proportions, angles. His methods appeared almost scientific. At length he sat back. Interesting. What have you discovered? Edward resembles Nathaniel more closely than he resembles his own father. I stared. What does that mean? I do not yet know, yet his expression suggested otherwise. At that moment, Arthur Pembroke entered unexpectedly. The solicitor appeared troubled. Mr. Holmes. Yes? I remembered something. Holmes became instantly attentive. Concerning Nathaniel. Yes? Please continue. Pembroke hesitated. Many years ago, when I first entered practice, I heard a rumour. A rumour? Nothing more. Those are often valuable. Pembroke lowered his voice. The story claimed that Nathaniel never drowned. Holmes nodded slowly. Go on. According to local gossip, he fled. Why? No one knew. The solicitor paused, then added, Some claimed he discovered something. Holmes's eyes sharpened. What? Again, no one knew. Yet the rumour persisted. For decades. The room fell silent. Holmes folded his hands. What else? Pembroke looked uncomfortable. There was one additional detail. Yes? The rumour claimed Nathaniel did not leave alone. Something changed in Holmes's expression. A subtle shift. Yet significant. Who accompanied him? No one knew. Man or woman? Pembroke swallowed. A child. Neither Holmes nor I spoke. The implication hung heavily in the air. A child, Holmes repeated. That was the story. The solicitor shook his head. I never believed it. Holmes rose slowly, then crossed to the window. Outside, clouds drifted across the moors. The estate stretched endlessly beneath the fading afternoon light. At length he spoke, mostly to himself. A forgotten heir, a missing heir, a child. He fell silent again. The pieces were moving, aligning, forming some larger picture still invisible to me. Then Holmes turned. His eyes shone with sudden intensity. Watson. Yes? Do you recall Edward's journal? Of course. The final entry. I thought for a moment. The answer lies with the man who never existed. Exactly. Holmes smiled. A slow, thoughtful smile. The wording is curious. How so? He did not write a man who never existed. No, he wrote the man who never existed. I frowned. What difference does that make? A great deal. Holmes moved toward the fireplace. It suggests a specific individual, someone erased from history. Precisely. A pause. Then, and I believe we have just found him. My pulse quickened. You know who he is? Not entirely. Then who? Holmes stared into the flames. The man who never existed, Watson. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Is almost certainly Nathaniel Ashcombe." Before I could respond, a servant burst into the room. The young man was pale, breathless, terrified. "Mr. Holmes, what is it?" "The chapel, sir." "What about it?" The servant struggled to speak. Finally the words emerged. "The crypt has been opened again." A silence followed. Then, "And this time," the servant whispered, "something has been left inside." Holmes was already reaching for his coat. Within moments we were hurrying toward the chapel once more, toward the crypt, toward whatever new message awaited us among the dead. And though I could not have known it then, the discovery we were about to make would change the entire direction of the case. For the first time, the missing heir himself was about to speak. Chapter 8. The Message Among the Dead. The chapel bell had begun tolling by the time Holmes and I reached the hill. Its solemn notes drifted across the evening air, lending an almost funereal atmosphere to our hurried approach. Servants clustered nervously near the entrance. Several crossed themselves as we passed. Others refused to descend into the crypt at all. Word of the latest discovery had already spread throughout Winter Hall. Fear travels swiftly in old houses. Holmes pushed through the gathering crowd without hesitation. Arthur Pembroke followed close behind. The others arrived moments later. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe, Mrs. Eleanor Ashcombe, Clara Henshaw, Reverend Mercer. Together we descended once more into the cold stone chambers beneath the chapel. The crypt appeared exactly as we had left it. Rows of coffins rested silently in their alcoves. Ancient dust covered the floor. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and age. Yet something had changed. Everyone saw it immediately. A small wooden box now stood in the empty alcove once occupied by Holmes Ashcombe's missing coffin. The box had not been there before. It rested directly beneath the brass plaque, placed deliberately, almost ceremonially. "Who found it?" Holmes asked. "The groundskeeper," said Pembroke. "He came to lock the chapel. And the crypt was empty earlier today." "Completely," Holmes nodded. "Which meant someone had entered after our last visit. Someone familiar with the estate. Someone bold enough to leave evidence where it would certainly be discovered." He approached the box carefully. No lock, no markings, merely plain wood. After a brief examination, he lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 objects: a pocket watch, a folded letter, and a signet ring. The ring immediately captured everyone's attention. It bore the Ashcombe crest, the same ring found beside the empty coffin weeks earlier, or so I assumed. Yet Holmes's expression suggested otherwise. He picked it up, turned it beneath the lantern light, then smiled faintly. "Interesting. What is it?" I asked. The first ring was a forgery. A collective gasp echoed through the crypt. "What?" Holmes nodded. "This one is genuine." He indicated a tiny mark engraved upon the inner band. A family jeweller's stamp. Pembroke stared. Then the ring discovered previously was planted. The implications were enormous. Someone had fabricated evidence. Someone had wanted investigators to believe Edward's ring had been found here, which meant the entire mystery may have begun with a lie. Holmes next examined the pocket watch. His expression changed immediately. "What have you found?" He handed it to me. The inscription upon the cover read, "To Edward. On your 21st birthday I opened it." The mechanism still functioned. The hands continued moving steadily. His watch? Almost certainly. Then Edward was here. Holmes did not answer. Instead, he unfolded the letter. The handwriting appeared hurried, uneven, yet strangely familiar. Pembroke inhaled sharply. "Good Lord, what is it?" "That is Edward's writing." Everyone crowded closer. Holmes read aloud. "If this message has been found, then events have progressed further than I hoped. I am alive. I was not abducted. I was not murdered. I left Winter Hall by choice. Do not search for me where others wish you to search. The danger is not outside this house. It has always been inside. Trust no story concerning Nathaniel Ashcombe. Trust no one who claims his death was accidental. The truth is buried beneath Winter Hall. And if Mr. Sherlock Holmes is reading this, tell him he is looking in the correct direction, but not at the correct generation. E.A. Silence followed. Complete silence. Even the air seemed motionless. At last Clara Henshaw spoke. "Edward is alive." Her voice trembled. "He was alive when this was written." "Apparently," said Holmes. Colonel Gregory stepped forward. "Then we know what happened." "Do we?" The colonel frowned. "He ran away." Holmes folded the letter. "Perhaps." "No perhaps about it." The colonel's relief seemed almost excessive. "The boy vanished voluntarily." "Did he?" Holmes met his gaze. "Then why remain hidden?" The colonel hesitated. No answer came. "Because none existed. If Edward merely wished to leave Winter Hall, he could have done so openly. No one had imprisoned him. No one controlled his fortune. Something else had driven him underground. Something he feared. Something connected to Nathaniel Ashcombe. Upon returning to the house, Holmes requested immediate access to family records, particularly those concerning the generation preceding Nathaniel. For the first time since arriving at Winter Hall, he seemed willing to share portions of his reasoning. "Edward's message contains the key. You understand it?" I asked. "Partially." He paced before the fire. "The most important sentence concerns generations. You are looking in the correct direction, but not the correct generation." "Exactly." Holmes stopped pacing. "Consider what we have assumed. That Nathaniel's disappearance lies at the center of the mystery." "Yes." "And does it not?" "It does." He raised a finger. "But perhaps not as the cause." The distinction puzzled me. "Explain." Holmes opened a family register. "Suppose Nathaniel discovered a secret. A dangerous secret. Clearly." He turned several pages. "Then what if that secret did not originate with him?" The idea struck me immediately. "You mean he uncovered something older?" "Precisely." Holmes smiled. "For the first time, Watson, we are asking the correct question." "And what question is that?" He tapped the register. "What happened before Nathaniel Ashcombe was born?" The answer occupied most of the evening. Together we examined decades of family history, birth records, marriage certificates, property transfers, legal documents. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then shortly after midnight, Holmes found it. A discrepancy, tiny, almost invisible, yet significant. "Ah," I looked up. "What is it?" Holmes compared two documents, then a third. His eyes brightened. "Extraordinary." "Holmes." He handed me the papers. I examined them carefully. The first concerned an inheritance transfer, the second a birth registration, the third a census record. To my eyes they seemed perfectly ordinary. "I see nothing." "Naturally," he pointed. "The dates." I studied them again, then suddenly noticed it. One individual appeared in the inheritance records months before his official birth. I frowned. "Impossible." "Quite." The name belonged to Henry Ashcombe, Nathaniel's father. Clerical error? Perhaps. Yet Holmes did not sound convinced. He continued examining records. Additional inconsistencies emerged. Small ones, harmless individually, disturbing collectively. Several documents appeared altered. Names had been changed. Dates adjusted. References removed. Someone had revised portions of Ashcombe family history, deliberately, systematically, over many years. The realization sent a chill through me. "You believe the records have been falsified?" "I am certain of it." "By whom?" "That remains unclear." Holmes leaned back. For several moments he simply stared into space. Then he spoke, almost to himself. "Edward discovered it." "What?" "The alterations." Holmes tapped the documents. He followed them backward. His eyes narrowed. Then someone realized what he was learning. At that moment a knock interrupted us. Arthur Pembroke entered. His face looked pale, concerned. "Mr. Holmes." "Yes?" "I thought you should know." What? The Colonel has left Winter Hall. Holmes sat upright. When? Less than an hour ago. Where did he go? We do not know. The room became very still. Alone. Apparently. At this hour? Yes. Holmes rose immediately. Interesting. You believe he is involved? I believe, said Holmes carefully, that men rarely wander across Northumberland after midnight without a reason. Within minutes we were preparing to follow. Yet before leaving, Holmes performed one final action. He removed Edward's letter from his pocket, studied it once more, then focused upon a particular line. The truth is buried beneath Winter Hall. A slow smile appeared. Not triumphant, not yet, but close. Watson. Yes? I have made a mistake. The admission startled me. Holmes rarely acknowledged error. What sort of mistake? I believed someone was hiding a crime. And now? His gaze shifted toward the darkened windows, toward the sleeping estate beyond. Now, I suspect someone has been hiding an entire identity. The significance escaped me. For the moment, only later would I understand that Holmes had just taken a decisive step toward the solution. Because before dawn arrived, we would discover where Colonel Gregory Ashcombe had gone, and what awaited us there would prove beyond question that the mystery of Winter Hall was far older and far more dangerous than any of us had imagined. Far out upon the moonlit moors, a forgotten grave was waiting to be opened. Chapter 9. The Grave on Blackthorn Moor. We left Winter Hall shortly after midnight. The wind had strengthened, sweeping across the moors in long, restless gusts that bent the heather like waves upon a dark sea. Holmes moved ahead with unusual urgency. Arthur Pembroke accompanied us reluctantly, lantern in hand. I could see unease growing in him with every step we took away from the house. "You are certain the Colonel came this way?" I asked. Holmes did not slow his pace. "I am certain he left the house in a hurry." "That is not quite the same thing." "No," said Holmes, "but it is sufficient." We followed the faint tracks across the uneven ground. Boot impressions, disturbed grass, occasional broken stems of heather, all leading steadily northward. The farther we went, the more isolated the landscape became. Winter Hall vanished behind the hills. The world narrowed to wind, darkness, and stone. At length Pembroke spoke again. "If Colonel Gregory is involved in any wrongdoing, I find it difficult to accept." Holmes glanced back. "Why?" "He is a decorated officer, a man of reputation." Holmes's tone remained calm. "Reputation is often a mask." We continued in silence. After nearly an hour, Holmes halted. He raised his lantern. Here, the ground changed subtly. Less vegetation, more exposed soil. Recent disturbance. Someone had stopped here, not briefly, deliberately. Holmes crouched. His fingers traced faint marks upon the earth, a circle, then another, then a straight line. "He has been digging," I said. "Yes, at this hour." Apparently, Holmes moved a few feet further, then stopped again. A low mound of earth lay ahead, partially concealed beneath heather. A grave, fresh. Pembroke recoiled. "My God!" Holmes approached without hesitation. The soil had been recently disturbed. A spade leaned nearby against a rock. Still muddy, still wet. "The Colonel did this?" I asked. "Yes. But why?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the mound carefully, then pointed at Watson. "Yes? Do you notice anything unusual?" I looked closely. At first I saw nothing. Then gradually it became clear. The grave had been opened, recently, but not freshly dug. It had existed before tonight. Someone had returned to it. Someone had reopened it and examined what lay within. Holmes began digging with his hands. Within minutes he uncovered a wooden coffin. Old, weathered. The lid had been forced open. "Empty," murmured Pembroke. Holmes lifted the broken lid further. Inside lay only dust, and one small object, a brass nameplate. He read it silently, then handed it to me. The inscription read, Nathaniel Ashcombe. A cold silence followed. "So it is true," I whispered. "He was buried here." Holmes shook his head. "No," I frowned. "But the coffin was never intended to contain a body." The statement made no sense. Holmes turned toward Pembroke. Where was Nathaniel officially buried? The solicitor hesitated. "According to records, here." "According to records," Holmes repeated. He pointed at the coffin. "This grave is a lie." A distant gust swept across the moor, carrying with it a hollow, mournful sound. Holmes insisted we search the surrounding area before returning. The Colonel's trail had not ended here. It continued beyond the grave, deeper into the moorland. We followed it cautiously. The wind grew harsher. Visibility worsened. The lantern light barely cut through the darkness. After another 15 minutes, we reached a small ridge. From here, Holmes suddenly stopped. Below us lay a shallow valley, and within it, something that caused Pembroke to gasp aloud. A structure, half collapsed, stone walls, once part of an old estate building, now abandoned. "I know this place," said Pembroke quietly. "What is it?" "Blackthorn Lodge. It was abandoned decades ago." Holmes studied it intently. "And yet someone has been here recently." We descended carefully. The structure was partially buried in earth and ivy. One section remained intact, a single chamber. Its door hung open. Inside, lantern light flickered. Holmes extinguished ours instantly. We approached silently. Voices drifted from within. One unmistakably belonged to Colonel Gregory Ashcombe. The other was unfamiliar, deeper, calmer, older. We moved closer. Holmes signaled silence. Peering through a broken window, I saw them. The Colonel stood in the center of the room. Opposite him stood a second man. Tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing. His face partially obscured. But his posture, his bearing, carried authority. The Colonel spoke first. "This ends now," the stranger replied calmly. "It ended 30 years ago." The Colonel's hand trembled. "You said it would remain buried." "It was buried." The stranger gestured toward the floor, until they started digging again. Holmes leaned slightly closer. The floor beneath the room had been recently disturbed. Fresh soil, tools, a partially opened crate. The stranger continued. "Holmes is close." At the mention of Holmes's name, I felt a chill. The Colonel stepped forward. He must not discover Nathaniel. The stranger laughed softly. "Nathaniel is not the problem anymore." "Then what is?" The man paused, then spoke with quiet certainty. "The problem is Edward." A silence followed. The Colonel's face tightened. "Edward knows?" "Not everything." "Enough?" "Enough to force my hand." Holmes's expression changed beside me. Focus sharpened. Every word now mattered. The stranger continued. "If Edward tells Holmes the truth about the inheritance line, everything collapses." "What do you want me to do?" the Colonel asked. The stranger hesitated, then answered, "Finish what we began." A long silence followed. Then the Colonel spoke. "No." The word echoed through the ruins. The stranger's tone darkened slightly. "You do not have that luxury," Holmes whispered almost inaudibly. "Watson." But before he could continue, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. Both men inside froze. The lantern inside swung slowly, toward us. The stranger turned sharply. "Someone is here." Chaos erupted instantly. Holmes pulled me backward. A shot rang out. Stone exploded beside us. We ran, down the ridge, into the darkness. Behind us, voices shouted. Footsteps pursued. Holmes moved with extraordinary speed despite the terrain. "Who was that man?" I shouted. Holmes did not answer. We reached higher ground before finally stopping. No pursuit followed. Only wind. Only darkness. Only silence. At last Holmes spoke. His voice was unusually controlled. "I now understand everything." You do? Yes. What did we just witness? Holmes turned slowly toward Winter Hall, barely visible in the distance. We have just seen the guardians of a lie. A pause. And Colonel Gregory Ashcombe is not the head of it. I stared. Then who is? Holmes's expression hardened. The man who never existed. The words struck me like ice. Nathaniel? Holmes shook his head. No, Watson. A long silence followed. Then he said it, calmly, precisely. The man who never existed is still alive, and he is not the missing heir. He turned back toward the distant lights of Winter Hall. He is the one who replaced him. And with that chilling revelation, Holmes began walking back toward the estate, toward a truth that had been buried for 30 years and was now finally beginning to surface. Chapter 10. The Man Who Never Existed. We returned to Winter Hall under a sky now stripped of moonlight. Clouds had thickened until the world itself seemed submerged beneath a lid of ink. Holmes walked in silence, not the silence of hesitation, but of resolution. A man who has seen the final pieces of a puzzle begin to click into place. Arthur Pembroke struggled to keep pace behind us. What did we just witness? I asked quietly. Holmes did not answer immediately. We crossed the estate grounds, passing darkened windows where unseen eyes might have been watching. At last he spoke. A rehearsal. A rehearsal for what? For the final act. We reached the main hall. Servants hurried past us, uneasy and whispering. News of the Colonel's disappearance had already spread. No one knew where he had gone after the confrontation on the moor. But Holmes knew something more important, who he had gone to meet. Once inside the library, Holmes closed the doors. He turned to Pembroke. I require every document relating to inheritance, ownership and guardianship of Winter Hall. The solicitor hesitated. That is, an extensive request. Then begin immediately. Holmes's tone left no room for refusal. Within minutes, boxes of records were brought in. Ledgers, legal transfers, letters of probate. Holmes worked without pause, page after page, name after name, date after date. I watched as the evidence of decades unfolded before him like a living organism. Then, abruptly, he stopped. Here. I leaned closer. What is it? Holmes placed two documents side by side. Do you see it? I studied them carefully. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then slowly, the inconsistency emerged. A signature repeated across two separate legal identities, the same handwriting, the same flourish, yet attributed to different individuals. That is impossible, I said. Only if one assumes both identities are genuine. Holmes leaned back, and I no longer make that assumption. A knock interrupted us. A servant entered, trembling. Mr. Holmes, there is someone here to see you. Holmes did not look up. Send them away. I think you should see this one. A pause. Why? The servant swallowed. Because he is already inside. Before Holmes could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, measured, deliberate. The door opened, and a man entered. He was tall, composed, dressed in dark travelling clothes. His face was calm in a way that felt practiced, carefully controlled. But it was not his appearance that froze the room. It was the silence that followed him in, as though the house itself recognized him. Holmes rose slowly. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe. The man inclined his head slightly. Mr. Holmes, I was beginning to wonder when you would return. The colonel smiled faintly. I have not been away. The statement hung in the air. Pembroke stepped forward. You were seen leaving Winter Hall. Yes. And now you are here. I have always been here. Holmes studied him. For the first time since I had known him, I saw something like uncertainty flicker in Holmes's expression. Not doubt, calculation, rapid recalibration. Then tell me, Holmes said quietly, where did you go on the moor? The colonel's eyes did not waver. I went nowhere. A pause. Then Holmes spoke again. Then you are either lying, he stepped closer, or there are two of you. Something shifted in the room, a subtle tension, the kind that precedes collapse. The Colonel's voice lowered. "You are very close, Mr. Holmes." "To what?" "To a truth that has survived longer than you have been alive." Holmes nodded. "Then let us stop pretending." The Colonel exhaled slowly. "You want the name? I already have it." Holmes' gaze sharpened. "And it is not Gregory Ashcombe." The room went still. The Colonel did not react, which was answer enough. Holmes continued. "You are not a member of this family." A pause. "You are the replacement." Silence. Then the Colonel spoke, softly. "Very good." A chill passed through the room. Even Pembroke stepped back slightly. Holmes did not move. "Then tell me," he said, "what is your real name?" The man smiled. For the first time, it was not a polite expression. It was something older, heavier. "Names are convenient things, Mr. Holmes." He walked slowly toward the fireplace. "They can be removed, assigned, forgotten." Holmes watched him carefully. "You erased Nathaniel Ashcombe." The man did not deny it. "Correct. And you replaced him." "Correct. Why?" The man paused, then answered, "Because Nathaniel discovered what Winter Hall truly was." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And what was that?" The man looked up. "At that moment," he said quietly, "Winter Hall stopped being an estate." A pause. "It became a system." The word meant nothing to me, but Holmes reacted. "Barely perceptible, yet real." "Go on," the man continued. "A system of inheritance manipulation, identity control, legal substitution, generational rewriting." Holmes spoke slowly. "You altered records, entire lines, and Nathaniel found proof." "Yes." "So you removed him." The man nodded. "And replaced him with a version of history that would never question itself." Holmes stepped forward. "Edward discovered this." "Yes." And he ran. The man's expression softened slightly. "Edward is intelligent." "Where is he?" A pause. Then the answer. "Alive." The word struck like a blade. Holmes did not react outwardly, but I felt the shift in the room instantly. "Where?" Holmes asked. The man smiled faintly. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you intend to survive the next hour." Outside, thunder rolled across the moor again, but this time it felt different. Closer, intentional. The man moved toward the door. "You are too late, Holmes." "For what?" "For stopping what was set in motion 30 years ago." Holmes followed him slightly. "You mean Nathaniel's disappearance?" The man shook his head. "I mean the replacement." Holmes froze. "For the first time, I saw him fully still." The man continued. "Nathaniel did not simply vanish. He was not killed. He was replaced." Holmes spoke carefully. "With Edward." A faint smile. "Yes." The room seemed to tilt. Even Pembroke gasped. "That is impossible," I said. But Holmes said nothing. Because he was already seeing it, fitting it together, all of it, the resemblance, the records, the inconsistencies, the erased history, the false ring, the warning letters, the altered identity. Holmes finally spoke. "Edward Ashcombe is not the heir." A pause. "He is Nathaniel's replacement." The man inclined his head. Finally. Holmes turned sharply. "Then who is Edward?" The man's answer came quietly. "The man who never existed." A silence followed so deep it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. Then Holmes asked the final question. "Where is the original Edward Ashcombe?" The man looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You have been asking the wrong question since you arrived." A pause. "The question is not where he is." A step closer. "It is who he became." And in that moment, Sherlock Holmes finally understood what had been done at Winter Hall. Not murder, not disappearance, but replacement of identity itself, across generations, across names, across lives. And the true horror of the case was only now beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 11. The Identity Beneath Winter Hall. The man who called himself Colonel Gregory Ashcombe left the library without another word. No one attempted to stop him, not because we could not, but because something about his certainty made action feel premature, as though any interruption would disturb a larger mechanism already in motion. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was different from all those before it. Heavier, final. Holmes remained still for several seconds. Then he spoke. "Watson." "Yes?" "Everything we assumed about the case is incorrect." That was not a statement Holmes made lightly. I looked at him. Incorrect in what way? In its structure. He turned back toward the scattered documents. "We believed we were investigating a disappearance." "Yes, we were not." "Then what were we investigating?" Holmes's voice lowered. "A transfer." The fire in the library had burned low. Outside, the storm had returned in full force. Rain hammered against the windows like impatient fingers. Holmes worked without pause. He rebuilt the timeline again, but differently this time. Not around Edward, not around Nathaniel, around the gaps, around the missing years, around the erased identities. "Look at this," he said suddenly. He placed 3 documents side by side: a birth record, a school record, a property transfer. Each referenced different individuals, yet each contained identical handwriting in the margins. "This is not coincidence," Holmes said. "This is authorship." "You mean the same person wrote all of them?" "Yes." "Over decades?" Holmes nodded. "Or one person wrote them all later?" The implication chilled me. "You're suggesting forgery on a generational scale." "I am suggesting something more precise than forgery." He tapped the papers. "Reconstruction." A knock interrupted us again. Pembroke entered slowly. He looked exhausted. "Mr. Holmes, I have been reviewing older archives as you requested." "Yes?" "There is something you should see." He placed a sealed envelope on the table. It was never officially filed. Holmes opened it immediately. Inside was a letter dated nearly 40 years earlier. As he read, his expression changed. Not shock, not surprise, recognition. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes did not answer at first. Then he handed it to me. The letter described a legal arrangement, a private agreement between members of the Ashcombe family, a clause concerning inheritance succession under extraordinary circumstances. The wording was deliberately vague, but one sentence stood out. "In the event of identity compromise, substitution of heir may be enacted to preserve continuity of estate governance." I lowered the paper. "This is insane." "No," Holmes said quietly. "It is structured." Pembroke looked disturbed. "I have never seen this document before." "That is because you were not meant to." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Who authorized it?" Pembroke hesitated. "According to this, the signature belongs to Lord Henry Ashcombe." Holmes leaned back. "Then we have our origin point." "Origin of what?" I asked. Holmes' answer came slowly. "A system of controlled inheritance replacement." The library door opened again. This time, it was Miss Clara Henshaw. She looked frightened, but determined. "I heard what happened," she said. Holmes studied her carefully. "Yes? I need to tell you something." She hesitated, then continued. "Edward was not the first." The room fell silent. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Explain." Clara swallowed. "My mother told me when I was young. There was another boy before Nathaniel." Pembroke looked confused. "That is impossible." Clara shook her head. "I was told never to speak of him." "What was his name?" Holmes asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Henry." A pause. "Henry Ashcombe." Holmes stepped forward. "Relation?" "My uncle." The words hung in the air. Pembroke frowned. "But Lord Henry Ashcombe was the father." Clara shook her head again. "No." Her voice trembled. "He had a brother." Holmes exhaled slowly. "A brother who does not appear in any official record." "Yes." "And what happened to him?" Clara looked at Holmes directly. "He disappeared." A silence followed. Then Holmes spoke. "Before Nathaniel." "Yes." And before Edward. Yes. Holmes turned slowly toward the fire. I see. For the first time, I felt the true weight of the case. Not a single disappearance, not even two, a pattern. That night, Holmes made a decision. We returned to the hidden chamber. Pembroke looked alarmed. Again? Yes. Why? Holmes' answer was simple. Because the system is still active. We descended once more into the forgotten wing. The chamber remained unchanged, but Holmes moved differently now, no longer searching, confirming. He approached the desk where Nathaniel's records had been found, then stopped. Watson. Yes? Look at the dust. I did. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed it. Fresh disturbance. Recent movement. Someone had been here again. Holmes opened a drawer. Empty. Another. Also empty. But the third contained something new. A single sheet of paper. Holmes read it silently, then handed it to me. It contained only one line. The next replacement has already been selected. My throat tightened. What does that mean? Holmes' expression hardened. It means the system continues. A pause. And Edward is no longer the only target. At that moment, a sound echoed from above. Footsteps. Many of them, moving quickly. Holmes extinguished the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Through the ceiling, voices carried faintly. Urgent, organized, controlled. Then a single word reached us clearly. Secure the air. Holmes's eyes narrowed in the darkness. They are moving. Who? He did not answer immediately. Then, Winter Hall is not a house, Watson. A pause. It is a machine. The footsteps above intensified, doors opening, commands shouted. The system Holmes had only just begun to understand was now reacting to his presence. And for the first time since the case began, he looked not like a man solving a mystery, but like a man standing inside something that had already decided its next step. Holmes placed a hand on my shoulder. We leave now. But Edward is not our priority. That surprised me. Holmes rarely abandoned a thread. But as we moved toward the exit, I understood. Because the system was no longer hiding. It was responding. And somewhere inside Winter Hall, the identity beneath it all was preparing its final adjustment. Holmes stopped at the doorway. One last time, he looked back at the chamber. They are not protecting Edward. His voice was quiet. They are preparing to replace him. Then he turned, and we ran. Chapter 12. Winter Hall Revealed. We did not return to Winter Hall so much as we were drawn back into it. The estate seemed different now. Not physically altered, but aware. Corridors no longer felt empty. They felt occupied, not by visible figures, but by intent, by movement just beyond perception. Holmes walked ahead with steady precision, as though following a map only he could see. Arthur Pembroke followed close behind us, pale and shaken. What is happening to this place? I asked quietly. Holmes did not look back. It is completing a cycle. A cycle. The word struck me as deliberate. What cycle? He paused only briefly. Identity. The main hall was no longer calm. Servants moved quickly through it, carrying papers, sealing doors, whispering instructions they did not fully understand. Winter Hall had become something else entirely. A place reorganizing itself. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe stood at the top of the staircase. But something about him had changed. Not appearance, position. He was no longer commanding the house. He was responding to it. When he saw Holmes, he spoke immediately. "You should not be here." Holmes stopped. "And yet I am." The colonel's jaw tightened. "It is already decided." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "What is decided?" A pause. Then the colonel answered, "The next succession." A silence fell. Holmes stepped forward. "Edward Ashcombe." The colonel did not deny it. Instead, he said something unexpected. "You are too late to stop it." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Then it is already in motion." "Yes." Holmes turned slightly toward me. Watson. Yes, this is not a murder case. A pause. It is a handover. We were led, without resistance this time, to the oldest part of Winter Hall. Not the forgotten wing. Deeper, beneath it. A concealed stairway behind the chapel crypt descended further than anything we had seen before. Holmes went first. I followed. Then Pembroke. The air grew colder, heavier. The walls changed from stone to something older, brickwork layered with repairs across generations. Finally, we reached a sealed chamber. The door was open. Inside, lanterns already burned, and people waited. Not servants, not family. Administrators, men in dark coats, professionals. One of them stepped forward. You are Sherlock Holmes. I am. The man studied him calmly. You have uncovered too much. Holmes replied without hesitation. I have uncovered enough. A faint expression, almost amusement, crossed the man's face. That is usually where people make mistakes. Holmes stepped into the room, and I followed. What I saw inside changed everything I thought I understood. The chamber was not a room. It was an archive. Walls lined with records, entire genealogies, rows of identities catalogued like inventory. And at the center, a table. Upon it lay a single ledger, open, current, active. Holmes approached it slowly. What is this? I asked. No one answered immediately. Then the man from before spoke. This is continuity. Holmes looked down at the ledger. Names filled the pages, but not as families, as sequences, one replaced by another, one identity overwritten by the next. Holmes spoke quietly. Edward Ashcombe is not the first. No. Nor Nathaniel. No. Holmes turned a page. How many? The man answered simply, Since 1762. A silence followed. Even Holmes paused. Then he asked, And the purpose? The man stepped closer. Preservation of estate governance. Holmes looked up sharply. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. Holmes closed the ledger. No, he turned slightly. The only question that matters is why you needed to erase people to preserve it. A faint tension spread through the room. The man did not answer immediately. Then, because inheritance is unstable, Holmes shook his head. No, his voice sharpened. Because truth is inconvenient. A pause. Then Holmes asked the final question. Where is Edward Ashcombe? The man looked at him for a long moment, then said, He is already here. The room went still. Holmes did not move. Show me. The man gestured toward the far wall. A hidden panel opened. Behind it, a smaller chamber. Holmes stepped forward. I followed. Inside stood Edward Ashcombe, alive, pale, but composed, and beside him, Colonel Gregory Ashcombe. But now I saw what Holmes had already realized. There were not two men. There was a system of roles. Edward spoke first. Mr. Holmes. Holmes studied him carefully. You are not missing. Edward nodded. No. Were you ever abducted? No. Holmes exhaled slowly. Then explain. Edward looked down. I left because I learned what I am. Holmes' eyes narrowed. And what is that? Edward hesitated, then answered, a replacement. Silence. Holmes spoke carefully. For whom? Edward looked up. For Nathaniel. A pause. And Nathaniel, Holmes added quietly, was a replacement for someone else. Edward nodded. Yes. Holmes turned back toward the archive chamber. And so it continues. Edward's voice softened. It must. Holmes shook his head. No. He stepped forward. It ends here. A ripple passed through the room. The man overseeing the system spoke sharply. You cannot stop succession. Holmes turned toward him. Watch me. What followed was not violence. It was exposure. Holmes did not destroy the system physically. He did something far more precise. He explained it, out loud, piece by piece. The forged records, the altered genealogies, the false deaths, the substitution process. the constructed identities. Each explanation stripped authority from the system, because systems like this do not survive clarity. They survive confusion, and Holmes gave them none. By the time he finished, even the administrators were silent. Finally, Holmes turned to Edward. "You are not a replacement." Edward blinked. Holmes continued. "You are a man who was told he was one." A pause. "That is different." Edward did not speak. Holmes faced the room. "And this ends in one of two ways." Silence. "Either you continue this cycle," he looked at the ledger, "or you end it." The man from the system spoke quietly. "And if we refuse?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Then Scotland Yard will become very interested in Winter Hall." That was enough. Not threat, conclusion. 2 days later, Winter Hall was placed under official investigation. Records were seized. The hidden archive was dismantled. The system, decades old, collapsed under scrutiny it had never expected. Edward Ashcombe remained alive, not as heir, but as witness. Nathaniel Ashcombe's identity was restored in part, not in life, but in record. Colonel Gregory Ashcombe disappeared from official account shortly after. Some said he left England. Holmes never commented. As for the man who never existed, Holmes explained it simply to me one evening back in Baker Street. There was no single man. What was there then? A method. And now, Holmes leaned back in his chair. Now, it has been exposed. Outside, London carried on as it always did, unaware of the quiet systems beneath inheritance, beneath history, beneath names. Holmes closed his eyes briefly. "And Watson?" "Yes?" "Never trust a family tree that is too orderly." I smiled. "I will try to remember that," Holmes added, almost absently. "Order is often the first lie." And with that, the case of Winter Hall was closed. Epilogue. The ledger that remained it. It is one thing to close a case. It is another to close what the case revealed. In the weeks that followed the dismantling of the Winter Hall archive, official reports declared the matter resolved. Certain records were amended, others quietly sealed. A few, I am told, were destroyed entirely in the interest of public stability. Such phrases always amused Holmes. They never reassured him. One damp afternoon, I found him once more at Baker Street, seated by the fire, a familiar posture of stillness settling over him. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a small parcel. "For you, Mr. Holmes, delivered by special messenger." Holmes opened it at once. Inside lay a single object, a ledger, not large, not ornate, but unmistakably old. I saw his expression change the moment he saw it. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes did not answer immediately. He turned the pages slowly, then stopped. "There were more," he said quietly. "More what?" "Replacements." I rose from my chair. I thought the system was dismantled. Holmes closed the ledger. "The system we saw, yes." A pause. "This is earlier than Nathaniel, much earlier." He placed the ledger on the table between us, and for the first time since the case began, I saw something like unease in Sherlock Holmes's eyes. Not fear, recognition of scale. "You mean Winter Hall was not unique?" I said. Holmes nodded slowly. It was only the most recent expression. A silence followed. Outside, the fog thickened further, swallowing the street beyond Baker Street entirely. "Who sent it?" I asked. Holmes turned the ledger over. No name, only a single marking on the inside cover, a symbol, a circle intersected by 3 lines. "I do not know," Holmes said at last, "but whoever it is," he closed the ledger carefully. "They were watching long before we arrived." I sat back slowly. "Then the case is not truly finished." Holmes gave a faint, thoughtful smile. "No, Watson." He leaned back in his chair. "It has only changed shape." Another knock sounded at the door. This time no one entered immediately. Holmes looked toward it. I followed his gaze. And for a brief moment, just long enough to be unsettling, I realized something very simple. Some cases do not end. They only move elsewhere. Holmes spoke softly. "Come in." The door opened, and the story of Winter Hall, though officially concluded, did not feel as though it had truly finished at all.